I was Hector's early death first love. Yet the very first thing he did after being reborn was to abandon me. Then he went to confess to the girl who was merely my substitute. The boy who once cried his eyes red and swore he loved me the most now stood in front of the camera, making a heartfelt promise to the substitute heroine. Regarding the fact that I love you, it has never had anything to do with anyone else. Later, on the day I accepted the confession of the unattainable, aloof flower, Hector crushed the wine glass in his hand in a moment of lost control. They all said that on that night. Hector went mad. Chapter 1. When I accidentally fell from the stage, everyone rushed toward me. Only Hector walked away alone. I rarely had the chance to see Hector's back, because the person he used to love was truly me. So every time, the one who turns away first is me, enduring the drilling, bone-deep pain. I grabbed the wrist of the person next to me before I passed out. Please arrange a full-body examination for me. According to the plot, I was supposed to die of stomach cancer a year later, and then become the early death first love Hector could never have. But now, the plot had changed. Seeing the decisive yet apologetic look in Hector's eyes before he left, I knew that I wasn't the only one who had been reborn. It was obvious who he was turning to find. After being reborn, the male lead recognized his true feelings and was determined to find the substitute heroine to prove his love. The tangled love and hate between them no longer needed the first love as part of the setup. But those chemotherapy sessions hurt so much. I really don't want to die a second time. Chapter 2. I was unconscious for a full day. The doctor said my body was healthy, except for a bit of gastritis. My calf was in a cast, clumsy and heavy, yet lying on the spotless white hospital bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. During the days I stayed in the hospital with my leg propped up, many classmates and friends came to visit me, but Hector never came, not even once. In my previous life, I had also fallen from the stage during rehearsal, but unlike now, the Hector from my last life stayed by my hospital bed for 3 days and 3 nights. Back then, he loved me deeply, yet when he saw the cast on my leg, he suppressed his anger so hard that his eyes eventually turned red from holding it in. That was probably when he loved me the most. I returned to school a week later, leaning on crutches, and unexpectedly stumbled into a grand public confession. Under the spotlight, Hector offered a bouquet of baby's breath to the girl who had given a flawless performance. It was the substitute heroine Helen's favorite flower. The live stream cameras were still rolling. The performance I had originally prepared for the freshman welcome event had now been taken over by Helen because of my accident during rehearsal a few days ago. It seemed that everything of mine would eventually belong to the substitute heroine. Hector stood before everyone, shining under the lights. His eyes looked as though they carried unshed tears. I saw restraint in them, and the blazing love of someone who had found again what he once lost. He made a heartfelt promise to the substitute heroine. Regarding the fact that I love you, it has never had anything to do with anyone else. I stared at Hector in a daze and suddenly remembered the year I had been critically ill. The boy who had always been rebellious and untamable cried until his eyes were red. He leaned against my bedside, choking softly as he begged me not to leave. It was then that he carefully slipped a ring onto my finger. Unfortunately, illness quickly took my life. Naturally, I never got to answer his request. The grand confession pushed the atmosphere of the entire event to its peak. Helen blushed, her brows shy as she accepted the bouquet of baby's breath from Hector. They looked like a perfect match, a pair destined by heaven, a union blessed by fate. Only Fernando leapt onto the stage in a few swift steps, snatched the white flowers, and squeezed them until his knuckles cracked. He threw the bouquet at Hector's feet, petals scattering across the floor. "Do you think you're being fair to Nina?" Hector froze. He instinctively turned his head and quickly spotted me standing at the edge of the crowd, but his gaze flickered away just as fast. Retreating, the boy who once loved me to his very bones now lowered his lashes slightly, yet still stood protectively in front of Helen. It was the stance of a guardian. In stories where the tortured male lead finally wakes up to understand who he truly loves, he would never again allow his heroine to suffer even the slightest grievance. Without waiting for Hector's response, Fernando punched him. The confession that had been so grand moments ago now looked like a farce. Standing outside the crowd, I touched the crescent moon bracelet on my wrist. It was a birthday gift from Hector. Back then, he had been so earnest. The boy who was always clumsy had somehow spent an entire month designing the bracelet just for me. When he put it on me, he had pretended to be fierce as he ordered me never to take it off. He said it was one of a kind in the world, a love meant only for me, but I was never his heroine. I was only the early death first love whose purpose was to push forward his relationship with the substitute heroine. What isn't mine will never belong to me. I suppose I should find an opportunity to return the bracelet to him. Chapter 3. I had seen what Hector looked like when he truly loved someone. That was in the timeline after my death. He never knew that my soul had been trapped by his side, nor that I could witness everything that happened afterward. At first, he was depressed and desolate. Later, he became obsessed with collecting merchandise related to me, and sought out many substitutes who resembled me. There were many who looked like my substitute versions, but Helen was the one who resembled me the least. She was also the woman who stayed by Hector's side the longest, and the heroine he loved most deeply. In the 3rd year after my death, Hector finally awakened and fell in love with the substitute heroine Helen. Their tangled love and hate could no longer accommodate anyone else. The so-called first love existed only as a tool for jealousy and mutual hurt in their love story. When Fernando learned that Hector had developed real feelings for my substitute, he was so furious he punched him. He questioned him again and again. "Do you think you're being fair to Nina?" Hector and Helen's wedding banquet was thrown into chaos by the sudden commotion, and my soul was forced to drift around them. I wanted to stop the fight, but I couldn't touch anything. I wanted to say, "Stop fighting." Honestly, Hector didn't really wrong me. The only thing Hector might have felt guilty about was the year he was kidnapped, and I took a knife for him. The wound cut to the bone, leaving a long scar on my back. Later, when I was diagnosed with a terminal illness and was critically ill, Hector went mad trying every possible way to save me. He cried until his eyes were red as he earnestly promised at my bedside that in this lifetime, he would only ever like me, and only ever marry me. I had never seen him cry with such fierce, devastating determination, but promises were never meant to be taken as truth. I snapped out of my memories. The 2 men struggling on stage were finally pulled apart by the people around them. Hector's fist still landed beside Fernando's ear at the last second. His eyes were dark and threatening as he gave a low warning. "Don't lose your mind." In my last life, after Fernando ruined Hector's wedding banquet, he soon faced bankruptcy from Hector's retaliation and eventually took his own life. After all, Fernando acted for my sake. I couldn't simply stand by and do nothing. I limped toward them and seriously explained to the pale substitute heroine, "Don't misunderstand. There is nothing between Hector and me." Setting the plot aside, whatever was between us should have been severed completely long ago. Hearing this, Fernando stood up. He shot Hector a cold, sharp look and supported me as we walked out step by step. Before leaving, I removed the bracelet. It had absorbed my body heat, but in the cold wind, it slowly turned icy. After a moment of thought, I tossed it into the trash can. I didn't expose the bracelet's significance in front of the substitute heroine. I figured Hector wouldn't give Helen something I had worn. The things he gave Helen were always the best. Never something so simple and fragile as this bracelet. Behind me, I felt a burning gaze, as though it wanted to bore through the bones of my hand. I turned back and saw Hector staring fixedly at my now empty wrist. His face looked absolutely terrible. Chapter 4. Only after that night did I learn that during the week I was hospitalized, Hector had launched an intense pursuit of Helen. They all said it was love at first sight, so grand and high profile that everyone on campus knew about it. Many people were already shipping Hector and Helen. When Hector liked someone, he truly was like this, passionate, brave, offering the very best of everything to that person. As for me, some people were watching to see me make a fool of myself. Some found me pitiful. I didn't take any of it to heart. Hector and I came from families of equal status, and rumors about us had even reached our elders. When my parents called to ask, I simply laughed and clarified my relationship with Hector. It was helping Hector, and also helping myself. I no longer wanted to be tangled in the love storyline of the male and female leads. Holding the freshly borrowed books, I slowly descended the stairs. My injured leg hadn't healed completely, and someone rushing to class bumped into my shoulder from behind. The books scattered all over the floor. Losing balance, I stared at the approaching steps and instinctively shut my eyes. But the expected pain never arrived. Someone steadied my forehead with a firm hand. When I saw who it was, my lashes trembled, and I murmured, Thank you. It was Jeremy. I hadn't seen Jeremy in a long time. I'd only vaguely heard that he had published another paper recently, that the teachers liked him very much, and that the guaranteed graduate program spot had already been given to him. Many people had confessed to him, but he never paid any attention. Just like in high school, he was the untouchable aloof flower on a distant peak, indifferent, emotionless, unreachable. He quickly withdrew his hand and bent down to pick up the books scattered on the ground for me. The white shirt he wore glowed brilliantly under the sunlight streaming through the window. The small mole at the corner of his eye shimmered in the light, as though it was flickering directly into the bottom of my heart. Now, his expression was completely indifferent, as if he didn't know me at all. I took the books he had picked up, and when he turned to leave, I instinctively grabbed the hem of his shirt. "Classmate, could you give me your contact information?" A very clumsy way of striking up a conversation. Jeremy's brows and eyes seemed to soften for a brief moment, but perhaps it was nothing at all. He lowered his gaze. His voice was light, yet every word was deliberate and clear. "Nina, are you planning to toy with me again?" There was a hint of self-mockery. My breath caught. So he hadn't forgotten me. Then right now, he must hate me very much. Chapter 5. My acquaintance with Jeremy began before I ever met Hector, but our separation was anything but graceful, or rather, in Jeremy's eyes, we were never truly together at all. I once told him I liked him, worked desperately hard to enter the same university as he did. Yet when he mustered the courage to confess to me, I rejected him, cruelly. By then, the plotline had already begun. Hector would fall in love with me when we entered university, and a few years later I would die of a severe illness and become his unattainable first love. It was a storyline that could not be altered. But at that time, I was already on the verge of moving Jeremy's heart. Even the boy who was like a frozen iceberg had shown me a gentle smile once, and that was something the system would never allow to happen. When the system bound itself to me, Jeremy's existence was nearly erased. People began to forget that cold and gifted physics prodigy. His body started turning transparent, and the traces of his existence were gradually wiped out by some supernatural force. I once saw Jeremy's entire life through the system's authority. It was beautiful. He would enter the nation's top university, and at a very young age become a renowned astronomer both domestically and internationally. The planet he would one day observe would even be named after him. He should not lose such a brilliant future because of me. At the teacher appreciation banquet that year, I poured a glass of red wine over his head in front of everyone. The dripping red liquid stained his shirt and shattered his pride completely, as well as his feelings for me. I lifted my chin, my gaze disdainful. "Just a poor student funded by my family. Do you really think you're worthy of liking me?" No one knew that the hand hidden inside my sleeve was trembling. After that day, I never saw Jeremy again. After a separation so absolute, he disappeared entirely from my world, and I finally met Hector, the male lead I was destined to fall in love with according to the story. The unalterable plotline guided me step by step into becoming Hector's early death first love. Yet after all these years, I've never had a single dream about Jeremy. Sometimes I truly feel that I was far too cruel back then. So cruel that even in my dreams, Jeremy refused to look at me, not even once. Chapter 6. Seeing that I remained silent for a long time, Jeremy quietly withdrew his gaze, the corner of his lips lifting slightly. "Don't provoke me again." I lowered my head, holding the stack of books, standing wordlessly in place. Someone below the stairs called my name in surprise. I snapped out of my daze and saw Hector standing at the bottom of the steps, looking at me with a hint of astonishment. He was gently holding Helen's hand, the substitute heroine he had spent 2 lifetimes pursuing and loving. But I had no mood to deal with them at that moment. I merely curled my lips faintly and steadied myself against the railing. Stepping down one stair at a time, I noticed Hector seemed to want to help me, yet his steps halted almost immediately because of the person beside him. Helen's eyes were slightly red as she whispered, "I don't want you to go." With how dramatically Fernando reacted on the day of the confession, Helen couldn't possibly be unaware that Hector once liked me. Hearing her words, Hector hesitated, a struggle flashing through his expression. But in the end, he held Helen's hand again and didn't come toward me. A breath of relief escaped me. Honestly, this was fine. I lowered my eyes and slowly continued downward. But before I even descended 2 steps, A lit phone screen appeared before me. It was a QR code for adding a contact. The famously cold and unreachable aloof flower effortlessly took the heavy stack of books back from my arms. He blocked in front of me, completely cutting off Hector's line of sight. Didn't you say you wanted my contact information? Jeremy raised an eyebrow. Concise and direct. Scan. My heartbeat stalled for half a second. I stared at him blankly, even the fingertips holding my phone warming with heat. Below the stairs, Hector finally seemed to realize something was wrong. He pulled his hand free from Helen's and crossed over to us in a few quick strides. He finally saw Jeremy's face. In truth, Hector and Jeremy didn't look alike, except for the tiny mole at the corner of their eyes. That made them seem similar in small, fleeting ways. Hector's hands clenched. He asked in a low, displeased tone, "Who is he?" But Hector quickly found an explanation for himself. His expression loosened slightly, and he tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You're looking for my substitute?" Hector's gaze dropped to my empty wrist, his expression dark and unreadable. It seemed he really cared about that bracelet. Jeremy turned his head slightly at that moment, holding the stack of books, his side profile cool and detached. His voice carried a hint of mockery, the tail rising faintly. "Nina," he asked, enunciating each word. "Am I a substitute?" I felt my heart nearly stop. Facing his cold gaze, I sighed softly and denied it. "No, he's an old classmate." Hector's expression slackened for an instant. His gaze returned to Jeremy's face, examining it little by little. It seemed he had realized something. His face turned pale. Helen tugged Hector's hand then, tears welling as she whispered, "Hector, let's go." His lips twitched as he staggered away behind Helen. I watched Hector leave. His eyes seemed slightly red when he turned away, though I wasn't sure if I imagined it. Yet Jeremy remained beside me, his voice open and calm. "Aren't you going? Or, do you expect me to carry you?" I lifted my eyes at him and asked softly, "Would that really be okay?" Jeremy clearly hadn't expected that response. He pressed his lips together, startled for a moment, then said with a tense expression, "No." He hugged the books, watching me pitifully inching down the steps. Finally, he extended a long, slender hand toward me. I paused and obediently took hold of his fingertips. I had held this hand before, and even after so many years, it was still warm and soft enough to make my heart tremble. With his support, I descended far more steadily than when I clung to the railing alone. After a brief silence, he lowered his gaze and spoke again. "I don't have a free hand. Don't overthink it." Chapter 7. Jeremy walked me back to the dormitory building. We were both quiet along the way. In truth, silence had rarely existed between Jeremy and me. In the beginning, Jeremy had been my desk mate. Back then, he always occupied the throne of first place, bright, aloof, untouchable. Many girls liked him, but all of them were pushed back by his indifference. Only I kept talking to him, again and again, never tiring, never caring whether he responded or not. Perhaps it was because my family had once financially supported him. He didn't talk much, but as long as it was me, he always gave a response. Jeremy placed the stack of books back into my arms. Just as I turned to head toward the dorm, he suddenly called out to me, "Your class schedule." His question confused me completely. I racked my brains for a while. In the end, feeling desperate, I hesitantly reported the name of my afternoon class. Jeremy's lips pressed lightly together, and for a moment, even the corners of his eyes seemed softened. He sighed softly. His refined features were still lazy and distant, yet it felt to me like he had returned to the way he was many years ago, indulging me for no reason at all. He curled his long fingers and tapped his phone screen once. Then I suddenly understood. We had already added each other as contacts. I could have simply sent him my schedule, instead of awkwardly trying to remember it aloud like this. I unconsciously curled my fingers into my palm, and even the tips of my ears warmed with heat. Jeremy said nothing more. He simply gave me a small nod before turning to leave. Before walking away, he left me with one sentence, "I'll come pick you up this afternoon." His voice was soft. Even long after returning to my dorm, I still hadn't calmed down. Holding the heavy stack of books, I felt my fingertips inexplicably scorching. I thought I could smell, faint and subtle between the pages, Jeremy's familiar scent. My heart skipped uncontrollably for a beat. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes, feeling an urge to cry, because I realized something devastating. Even after all these years, I still, truly, very deeply like him. Chapter 8. My interactions with Jeremy seemed to increase. He would walk me to and from class, and occasionally bring me breakfast. He still didn't talk much. At first, I thought he would never acknowledge me again, but after his silence, he always responded. During the days my leg was injured, I think I experienced the happiest moments of my university life. But there always comes a day when things end. My leg had mostly healed, and naturally, Jeremy had no reason to continue taking care of me. Or rather, the only reason he had cared for me so patiently during this time was likely because of our past. The bond from many years ago. But after walking me to class again, he didn't leave like before. He sat down beside me, looking somewhat languid as he gazed at the ginkgo leaves outside the window. I widened my eyes, softly testing, "You're not leaving?" He retracted his gaze from the window, answered with a quiet and then lowered his eyes, speaking calmly, "Nina, I won't be coming tomorrow." Even though I knew this day would eventually come, a wave of indescribable bitterness still rushed through my chest. I forced down my emotions and replied softly, "Okay." I tried to focus on the lecture, but my thoughts drifted. I couldn't remember much of what the teacher said afterward, until Jeremy tapped on my desk, and I looked up, realizing I was being called to answer a question. But at that very moment, Jeremy's hand became slightly transparent. Just like all those years ago, a crushing panic seized my heart. I looked at him in horror, grabbing his wrist tightly, terrified he would be erased again, like before, years ago. Because of my feelings for Jeremy, the prerequisite storyline couldn't proceed normally. As a result, he had nearly been erased from the world. I had thought Hector's rebirth was already the anomaly, but now it seemed everything was repeating. Perhaps sensing something was wrong, Jeremy suddenly held my wrist in return, lowering his eyes. He explained to the teacher, "She isn't feeling well." I drifted numbly as he led me out of the classroom. His lips pressed into a tight line, his jaw tense. He looked worried. I recognized that path, the road to the campus infirmary. But I wasn't sick. I didn't want to go. I pulled my hand away again, trembling all over, just like back then, back when the system told me Jeremy would be erased from existence because of me. At that moment, I stared without blinking as the system showed me Jeremy's future. It belonged to him alone, a future I didn't want to miss even for a second. But his future didn't include me, nor should it include me. I looked at Jeremy in front of me. His expression was stunned, his breaths shallow. I dug my nails hard into my palm, the pain keeping me lucid. My voice was cold, each word crystal clear. "Get lost. Jeremy. Stay away from me." His lips moved, as if wanting to say something, but with a pale face. I turned away without looking back, leaving him behind once again. Chapter 9. I walked forward aimlessly, my thoughts a tangled mess. I didn't know whether the system would come for me again. Drizzling rain began to fall. I hid under the covered walkway, and a cat in the corner seemed to recognize me, circling around my feet. I crouched down. Rain hit the ground and splashed upward, wetting the hem of my pants. The kitten rubbed affectionately against my fingertips. The warm touch pulled me back from the void into reality. But rainy days were so cold. My heart felt empty, and it hurt. I buried my head against my knees, my tears hiding quietly beneath the endless sound of falling rain. It felt like a long time had passed, yet also like only a moment. Someone stepped through the puddles and stopped in front of me. Even though he was trying hard to steady his breathing, I could still hear the faint panting, like he had run all the way here. His voice was tight, as if gritted through his teeth. "Nina, are you planning to mess with me again?" Instinctively, I tightened my grip on my sleeve, not daring to lift my head. I was afraid Jeremy would see the traces of my crying. I pinched myself hard, forcing my voice to remain steady, but mixed with the sound of the drizzle. My voice was muffled and hoarse. "Yes," I said, pretending to sound fierce. "I am messing with you." So if he misunderstood me, that was fine, as long as he stayed away. But in the next moment, Jeremy's hand covered the one I had been using to pinch myself, gently wrapping around it. He pried my hand away and pinched my chin. His voice was calm, indifferent, yet his eyes carried an inexplicable sharpness. He asked, "Didn't I tell you not to provoke me again?" Yes, he had. The day we reunited, he had warned me harshly, but now, I didn't want to answer, didn't want to say anything at all. Under the weight of his dark gaze, I turned my eyes away, almost helplessly, and then, a cool, clean scent fell over me like a tide. Jeremy rested his forehead against my shoulder, his eyes half lowered. He let out a laugh that sounded almost self-mocking, his voice exhausted. "Sometimes I wonder how you can be so heartless." The spot where he leaned against me had gone completely stiff. I curled my fingers unconsciously. "The one who kept making a fool of me, again and again, wasn't that you?" His voice carried a hint of confusion. "So why are you crying?" The abandoned kitten hadn't run off because of Jeremy's sudden appearance. It was usually very wary. I had fed it for a long time before it grew close to me. But now, it circled Jeremy affectionately, mewing softly at him. Jeremy had fed this cat too, but I had never once run into him. In that moment, my heart felt unusually calm. My tears burned. I forced them back, speaking disjointedly. "Don't come near me, you'll disappear. I saw it. Your future is beautiful. But, Jeremy," my voice choked as I said, "in your future, there is no me." I had asked myself countless times. His future was so bright. Why couldn't it include me? Through blurred tears, Jeremy leaned toward me without a word. He wiped my tears gently with his fingertips, carefully brushing them away. He called my name, Nina. "Will you believe me?" Chapter 10. This was my first time coming to Jeremy's secret base. Though it wasn't really a secret base. It was an astronomy classroom specially approved for Jeremy by the teacher. Unlike the empty public classrooms, this one was filled with astronomical models of all sizes. Old yellowed parchment, celestial globes big and small, draft papers covered in calculation steps were casually piled to one side. Jeremy pulled me to sit down first, then poured me a cup of hot water. I held the warm cup quietly while he opened a document on his computer for me. A research paper, an unpublished one. But the moment I saw the beginning of the paper, I was completely stunned, because this paper should never have appeared here. I had seen this paper in the future, in the year Jeremy turned 28, when he observed a terrestrial exoplanet. But what made him famous wasn't the discovery of the Earth-like planet. It was this very paper on the multiverse and quantum mechanics. On our way to the astronomy classroom, I had told Jeremy, in fragments, about my rebirth and everything that would happen in the future. But he lowered his eyes quietly and accepted it with surprising ease. I originally thought astronomy students might naturally be more accepting of supernatural events. But now, clearly, that wasn't the case. Jeremy paused for a moment, speaking cautiously. "I once had a dream. I can't remember the details clearly, but the only thing I do remember is these papers." After waking up, he wrote down everything he remembered. He calculated and recalculated, deduced and rededuced. The results were exactly as they appeared. Jeremy said, "Rather than calling it rebirth, it's more like you entered a parallel universe. Each universe has its own independent space-time and physical laws. Every different choice branches into a new universe, leaving behind a different cosmic trajectory. Just like Schrödinger's cat. Since a system capable of interfering with world lines exists, then a multiverse must also exist. No system, no manipulation." His eyes softened. "You'll be safe. You'll live a long life." My breathing faltered. My heart was beating so fast, as though something was about to burst out. But then I remembered how, in class, his hand had begun turning transparent. The warmth in my chest turned cold again. I turned my head away, lowering my eyes. "But just like before, you've started turning transparent again." Jeremy merely smiled faintly. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he lifted his brows slightly. "Do you like me?" A very straightforward question. And had this been long ago, I might have blushed all the way to my neck. But now, I nodded heavily, bitterness stinging my nose. I looked at the proud, cold-natured boy before me, the boy I had fallen for when I was 17. I looked straight into his eyes and said seriously, "I like you very much. I've always liked you." Jeremy let out a soft sigh and raised a hand to cover my tear-filled eyes. "Then that's enough." His voice was gentle. "Even if that day really comes, bones shattering, his existence erased from the world, that would still be a price I'd willingly pay." Chapter 11. After that day, my heart seemed to finally settle. At first, I was terrified Jeremy would disappear again because of me. Every time he came close, I instinctively backed away, but it was useless. My interactions with him only increased. Whether it was the basketball court we passed by, the study room in the library, the lawn glowing in the morning sun, or the corridor dyed in evening clouds, I always ran into him. It was as if he wanted to make up, all at once, for all the years we had missed each other. But what happened in class that day, the transparency, had not been my imagination. As my encounters with Jeremy grew more frequent, his transparency became more noticeable. His hand would sometimes turn transparent, occasionally unable to touch objects. Eventually, it became so serious that even he began to notice it himself. Whenever I ignored Jeremy, he simply followed me step by step, but there was always a weight lodged in my chest. Sometimes I even regretted it, that I shouldn't have revealed everything that day. Walking forward distractedly, I naturally failed to notice the basketball flying toward me, but someone blocked it for me. Jeremy rubbed his wrist. Half an hour ago, that wrist had been transparent for a long time and still hadn't fully returned to normal. It was the longest episode so far. Before this, it had lasted at most a dozen seconds. This meant his transparency had worsened significantly. The system was preparing to erase him again. Seeing the paleness of my face, Jeremy merely smiled gently at me. "Don't worry." He looked at his reddened palm. The lines on that palm were clear, just like the promising future I had once seen. The student who had thrown the wrong shot blushed and came over to apologize. His eyes flickered, clearly trying to flirt, but Jeremy blocked every attempt with concise, cutting responses. I didn't want to deal with him anymore. I turned away, silent, tears falling. Jeremy reached out to smooth the hair blown messy by the wind, smiling as he looked at me. A good news and a bad news. He didn't ask which I wanted first. He started on his own. The bad news is, this world is most likely not the cat's opposite world. In his analysis that night, Jeremy theorized that if a world allowed system interference, that was the world where the cat survived. According to Schrödinger's cat, the cat's opposite world, the one where the system cannot interfere, was the world we needed to find. Jeremy's worsening transparency was because of me. Clearly, the world we were in was one where the system existed. His words tore apart all the fragile illusions we'd been holding on to. My eyes reddened. But before I could speak, Jeremy continued, "But that doesn't mean we can't create the cat's opposite world ourselves." He smiled slightly. "Unfortunately for the system, I think I've found a way." Chapter 12. Jeremy rose to the top of the campus trending discussions with 3 high-quality academic papers. All of them were accepted by top astronomy journals. He had always been talented. Otherwise, his advisor would never have secured a private astronomy classroom for him. I remembered these papers. They should have been part of Jeremy's graduate research in the previous timeline. But their content was not exactly the same as before. He built upon the existing foundation and put forward new ideas that surpassed the original ones, enough to shake the academic world. Because he gained access to high-quality academic resources earlier in this life, he grew rapidly. The word talent manifested in him to its fullest. With this came a flood of continuous, intense attention. But strangely, the transparency episodes never appeared on Jeremy again. The system could no longer erase his existence. After finishing another school-arranged interview, Jeremy pulled me outside. Now that his reputation was skyrocketing, many students recognized him. Passing through the stairwell, people kept glancing toward us. We finally stopped at that same corridor. The stray kitten lay obediently at our feet. Jeremy sat on the steps and explained everything to me. From my observations, the so-called system doesn't possess absolute supernatural power. If the system's power were absolute and irresistible, then when I deviated from the plotline and fell in love with Jeremy, it wouldn't have tried to correct the deviation with a threat of erasing him. That method carried too much risk, too many uncontrollable variables. If the system truly had absolute control, It should have erased Jeremy quietly and completely, leaving no loose ends. That day, the basketball that came flying toward me was blocked by Jeremy's hands even though they had been transparent moments before. That wasn't a loophole, and it certainly wasn't a coincidence, because many people were watching him at that moment. In the hearts of the player who threw the ball, and the surrounding onlookers, Jeremy existed, solid and real, and because of that, he was pulled back to normal. From there, he discovered the key. Back when he was just a young high school student, erasing his existence was easy. As an ordinary student, his social ties were simple: family, classmates, a few teachers. With such a small sample size, altering their memories quietly was extremely easy. But when the sample becomes large enough, no one can erase his existence anymore. Because in the minds of countless people, Jeremy was undeniably real. He would no longer vanish into thin air. When everyone recognizes the meaning of his existence, no one can erase the traces he leaves in the world. And so, contrary to his usual style, he published 3 papers in top journals in rapid succession, high profile enough for the whole world to know him. Jeremy paused. Thoughtful. Actually, that dream kept giving me hints. If your rebirth and my dream were not coincidences, then the me from the previous lifetime must have already discovered the key to breaking the system. Which was why, at the end of that dream, even though he forgot everything else, he remembered those papers perfectly. But there's one thing you said that isn't right. Jeremy turned. The distant sky was painted with breathtaking crimson by the sunset, and the evening breeze brushed past softly, just like the gentleness in his gaze as he looked at me now. You once saw my future through the system. You saw success, fame, yet loneliness. A future without you is incomplete. He smiled at me, eyes curved. Nina, that was not my future. Chapter 13. Winter passed. When the snow began to melt, I arrived at the end of my life from my previous lifetime. I remembered that day clearly, the grand birthday banquet my family had prepared. I collapsed during the banquet and was soon diagnosed with stomach cancer, even though I had been keeping up the habit of regular checkups during this time. Jeremy still dragged me to get a full body examination on my birthday. The results showed I was healthy. Jeremy had always taken excellent care of me, and I loved myself too. The birthday banquet invited many people. With graduation approaching, my parents were already planning for me to take over the family business, constantly creating opportunities for me to appear more publicly. Hector also came. After that day we parted. I would still occasionally run into Hector on campus, but I always avoided him immediately, to spare him and the substitute heroine any discomfort. My friends partied late into the night, mostly old classmates. Near midnight, they began playing Truth or Dare, holding a glass of orange juice. I watched them fool around from a corner. Hector sat beside me at that moment. He asked quietly, "Why aren't you wearing that bracelet anymore?" I still felt guilty about it. The bracelet carried a boy's most sincere affection, but I ended up throwing it away. I hadn't been able to return it to him personally, so I only answered, "Because it's not appropriate, because that bracelet no longer belonged by my side, nor was it appropriate to appear in front of the male and female leads." So I could only fail the boy's former sincerity. The spinning bottle eventually stopped on me. At that point, everyone had already answered enough truths. So they chose a dare for me. The dare drawn was, kiss the person of the opposite sex on your right. The person on my right was Hector. Hector relaxed slightly, his fingers curling subconsciously. The look he gave me carried tension, and a little bit of anticipation. I didn't understand why there would be anticipation. Wasn't the one he loved most the substitute heroine, Helen? Before I could say anything, Jeremy suddenly stood up. He had been sitting opposite me, the aloof academic genius who always remained cold and silent, whom no one dared to provoke. He asked softly, "Can you not choose the dare?" His voice wasn't loud, but everyone somehow heard it. As all eyes turned toward him, fireworks bloomed outside the window. A vast galaxy exploded before my eyes, and my world lit up from that moment. He thought for a moment, then said, slowly and seriously, "I'll get jealous, because even after all these years, I still seem to like you the same as before." No one had ever imagined that the famously aloof flower, who was said to be unreachable, would one day confess in public. The room grew silent. Only Hector's expression broke. He lost control and shattered the wine glass in his hand. With his eyes lowered, he took something from his pocket. The bracelet I had once thrown away. It was still clean and shining. He stubbornly grabbed my hand, trying to fasten it back onto my wrist. I won't allow it. Nina, you can't say yes. His voice trembled, but I stopped his hand and placed the bracelet back into his palm. Hector, don't do something you'll regret. From the moment he was reborn, the moment he abandoned me and went to find the substitute heroine, he had already made his choice. He was the female lead the male protagonist chose even after breaking free from the plot. The heroine destined for him. As for his feelings toward me, perhaps unwillingness, perhaps guilt, but it should never have been love. Hector only shook his head, the corners of his eyes slightly red. We broke up long ago. His voice was very low. I froze at his words, standing there in a daze. He asked again, "So have you always treated me as his substitute?" The question was difficult for him to ask. It must have tormented him for a long time. My expression softened. "No, you're not his substitute. I've always kept the two of you separate. Even though the mole at the corner of their eyes was so similar. Even though throughout all those years apart, I constantly missed the person in my heart. I still kept them clearly apart." But Hector no longer seemed able to listen. The hand clutching the bracelet was gripping so hard that blood seeped through his fingers. Without a word, he turned and walked away. The blood-stained bracelet was thrown aside, rolling under the sofa, once again gathering dust. I looked at my stunned friends. I choose truth. I unfolded the slip of paper. The question was simple. How long have you liked someone? Probably 2 lifetimes worth of time. The clock struck midnight. A brand new day. No sickness. No storyline. No so-called early death first love. I had finally reached my new life. After sending off the guests, Jeremy and I stood on the terrace, watching the warm, brilliant lights in the distance. Jeremy said, "You still haven't answered me." I had yet to respond to his confession. I turned back to look at the boy I had loved for 2 lifetimes. In his eyes were a curved moon and a city full of flowers. In that moment, tears filled my vision. I have a secret about how I've liked you. Long before any storyline ever began, he gazed at me gently and resolutely, his voice soft and brief. "What is it?" I shook my head, not answering. Instead, I asked him, "In your future, would you be willing to add one more person, me?" Jeremy paused for a moment, then smiled as he took the hand I held out to him. Fireworks burst, their trails flowing down across the night sky. He curved his lips, speaking softly, "It would be my pleasure."